The topic that the brother mentioned that we've been given today is the means by which we may, or which can help us, we should say, stick to the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Well, if we go to the hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, we see that in fact the heart of the believers, the heart of anyone actually is very vulnerable. Well, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam in different hadith has described that someone may do the acts of Jannah, the acts of paradise, until he is just a handspan away from paradise, and then the qadr overtakes him and he does the acts of the hellfire and he is thrown into the hellfire. Similarly, someone may do the acts of the hellfire until he is just a handspan away from the hellfire, and then the qadr overtakes him and he does the acts of the paradise and he is into paradise. Well, from this hadith and from other hadith, we know that we are, on the Day of Judgment, we are going to be judged according to the deeds that we performed or the state that we were in at the time of our death. And the important thing is what we were doing at the time of our death. If we were on Iman, if we were believers at that time and doing good deeds, inshallah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will judge us accordingly. But even if we spent 20 or 30 years doing good deeds, and then we started to stray from the path and continued to stray until we died, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will raise us as someone who was straying from the path. Well, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, in talking in particular about the hearts of human beings, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said that the heart of a human being, or the hearts of all human beings, is between two fingers of Ar-Rahman, or Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and he may turn it to any which way he wishes. So the heart of the human being, as we can see from this, is something and that we have to be very careful about. That alhamdulillah, right now we're following the deen, we see the truth, yet our hearts are such that it could be the case any time, wa na'udhu billah, that we may stray from the truth. And in fact, the Prophet ﷺ, as Aisha narrated, the Prophet ﷺ himself, he used to make dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Ya muqallib al-qulub, thabbit qulubana, or thabbit qalbi ala dinik. In the world nowadays, there are many things that can harm us and that can take us away from the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And in the situation that we're living in now, for example, is very much different from the situation of the Sahaba and Tabi'in and so forth. And wa ta'ala, make my heart firm upon the faith. We face temptation. The Prophet ﷺ himself used to make this dua quite often, as Aisha, his wife, has narrated. Telling our deen for the sake of this dunya, that someone is in the morning, he's a believer, and in the evening he's a kafir. Or he's in the evening, he's a believer, and in the morning he's a kafir, or the opposite. As well as be aware of those things that will help us, inshallah, to stick to the straight path. Well, that's what I hope, inshallah, to discuss today. We started a little bit late, so we might have to compact things a little bit, but I hope to, inshallah, what I'd like to discuss are some of the things, inshallah, we will be able to stick to the straight path. But it is true that sticking to the straight path, as some of the early scholars said, sticking to the deen nowadays is like trying to hold a hot coal in your hand. And it is difficult. There's pressures coming pressures coming to you from sometimes your closest friends, your families, the people who are around you, the Muslims who are around you, the kuffar who are around you, and so forth. Scholars have to be very careful about this kind of situation. Because scholars, it's easy for them to get prestige in society. It's easy for them, for example, nowadays to give government positions or university posts and so forth. And then once you get something, in this dunya, once you get something, it's the nature of mankind, he doesn't want to give it up. Suppose you're given a nice position that has made many people stray from the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, comes the temptation, or then comes the trial, where you are asked by people above you either to do something haram, clearly haram in the sight of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or lose your job, or be removed from what you have. For example, respecting them and giving them due and giving him more power and more status, that big house, that nice car and everything that you have for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Or are you going to fail this trial and submit to what they want for the sake of your job and pursuing his own glory, his own goals in this dunya? The fact that when he compromises the deen for this world, he might think he's going to do it temporarily, inshallah, later fix the situation yet he must realize that he might die the next day or the day after that, right after he had just sold his deen. That has led many people astray, and that's the trial of wealth. In one case it's power, honor and status, worldly position, and also wealth. Desire Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, واصبر نفسك مع الذين يدعون ربهم بالغداة والعشي يريدون وجهه ولا تعد عيناك عنهم تريد زينة الحياة الدنيا ولا تطع من أغفلنا قلبه عن ذكرنا واتبع هواه وكان أمره فرطا. Halal haram, they will do it. In Surah Al-Kahf, verse 28 says, and keep yourself patiently with those who call on their Lord morning and afternoon. They have to be aware that if they start making these haram things halal for them, then in fact they have left the realm of Islam. But even worse is the situation where there has been loss. Well, this verse in particular was revealed about the poor Muslims, or the Muslims at that time who were poor, and not turning your attention away from them towards those people who had power, who had money, who had wealth at that time, but they were heedless of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the hereafter. Subhanahu wa ta'ala, and then when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave him wealth, now he had the freedom to do what he wanted. Before maybe he didn't even have the money to spend in haram and to do things that Muslims should not do. But then when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave him the wealth, now he had the freedom and the time and whatever to now engage in haram and to leave the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And in fact Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Surah Tawbah describes a situation like that, in which some people, they said, they promised to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would give them, then they would, spend it in the way of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and be from the righteous. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَلَمَّا أَتَاهُم مِّن فَضْلِهِ بَخِلُوا بِهِ وَتَوَلَّوْا وَهُمْ مُعْرِضُونَ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Surah At-Tawbah verses 75 and 76 says, and of them are some who made a covenant with Allah, saying, if He had bestowed on us of His bounty, we will verily give charity and will be among the righteous. Then when He gave them of His bounty, they became niggardly and turned away. A verse. As a footnote, we don't have time for too many footnotes. But some people believe that this particular verse was revealed with respect to a specific Sahabi. Do you remember his name? Hatib. Hatib, that he made this promise, and then when Allah gave him the wealth, he turned away. And then even later he tried to come to Abu Bakr and pay zakat, and Abu Bakr refused the zakat, and Umar refused the zakat. There's no truth to that story whatsoever. This is not in relation to him. Okay. And it is not in relation to that Sahabi. But this is a general, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is giving a general warning that that there are people, there have been people, and there will always be people. And this is the principle basically of the teaching of the Quran, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not talking about one man, one incident, but is giving us principles, lessons of things that will continue to happen until the Day of Judgment. And we have to be careful not to be like those kind of people. That we say to ourselves right now, if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would give me wealth, I would spend it, I would give this mosque so much money, I'd give Dar al-Taraf so much money, I'd give that brother I met so much money. And then when we get the wealth, at least not in a complete negative sense like this, but for example in the 70s and the 80s, and you should also remember that any shahawat any desire that you fulfill against the commands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in this world, and it's going to be just for a very small pleasure that you might get in this world, passing pleasure that you might get in this world, while you are actually sacrificing the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and you might be sacrificing, if it makes you stray from the deen completely, you might be sacrificing even Jannah completely in the hereafter. This could be true for anyone. It's a shahawat, and when it gets into your soul, when the desires gets into your soul, sometimes it's very difficult to keep yourself from it. With evil friends or friends who are not, always remind yourself, even if you're committing a sin, in a satisfactory way, following the way of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Remind yourself that this is something wrong in the sight of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You must recognize that it is wrong, and you must always hope and pray and ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to help you to give up that sin. Unfortunately, sometimes hang around with or accept as our friends. And even among the Muslim community here, there's lots of places, lots of Muslims who are not actually practicing the deen. And you should always keep these three aspects in mind. And sometimes they might be influencing us in such a way that we don't even realize. And step by step, they are taking us away from the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We must be very careful to see who we choose as our friends. and who we spend our time with. We must spend our time with those people who will remind us of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and so forth, as I mentioned later. Because the Prophet ﷺ said that the person is following the religion of his friend, on to mislead people, to take them away from the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The people that we associate with, that he said that in fact that the person is on the deen of his close friend, yani Khalil, the deen of his close friend, the way of his close. So if any of us know that we have this problem, that we associate in our closest friends are from the kuffar, or from those people who are not practicing the deen, and we should remember this hadith, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, even though we claim to be following the straight way and following what is right, and when we mix with them, we don't do the haram with them, and it's just simply the fact that we are choosing these people as our friends shows that there's something wrong with them. And it's just simply the fact that we want to associate and mix and stay with these people, this is a sign that there's something wrong with us. And the Prophet ﷺ warned us about that by saying that we are following the deen of our best friend. So be very careful and look to see who you choose as your friend. They are inviting non-Muslims to come to speak to Muslims about Islam. This is just unbelievable. And we don't have anyone who can come to us, any Muslims who can come to us and speak to us about Islam. We have to bring kuffar. If you bring a Bedouin from the middle of the desert, it's better than bringing these kuffar. Even if he just knows La ilaha illallah and how to make coffee. This person is better than these kuffar. Also Ahl al-Bid'ah also. The same is true for Ahl al-Bid'ah. If you know, for example, these books are coming from the Shia, or this speakers from the Shia and so forth, you may think, oh no, he's a good guy, and we know he has some bid'ah, and we know his bid'ah, so inshallah he won't be able to affect us. No. Oh, the early scholars were very harsh, and don't even sit with the people from Ahl al-Bid'ah. Because even if you just sit with them, they might affect your heart, and you may not even realize it. So this is actually one of the means, I got into it, but I didn't mean to. This is one of the means to help us stick to the way of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to the path, to stay away from these sources of doubts in Muslims. And you just stay away from them completely. Because the shaitan will use that, put it into your heart. In fact, many scholars said that the doubts and the shubahat are much more dangerous than the shahawat, the desires. Because at least shahawat, sometimes you can go out and satisfy them and they'll be quiet for a while. But the shubahat, stay in your heart and get bigger and bigger and bigger until they can lead you to kufr. Okay, I'll go just 3. 1 while I'm at work and maybe Maghrib after work and so. No, you're coming home too late from work. Okay, I'll go just Fajr and Dhuhr. Even Fajr, she'll find some excuse. Dhuhr, you had work anyway, so I don't think she'll be able to get that. But the point is that when the wife sometimes put pressure on the man from your spouses and from your children, there are enemies to you. Not in the sense necessarily that automatically divorce her, but he has to decide whether or not he's going to submit to her will, or he's going to try to change her and bring her closer to the way of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Use, as I said, those means that will help us, inshallah, stick to the way of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And alhamdulillah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in His mercy has shown us many ways and has shown us many things that will help us keep our hearts firm to the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We don't have much time left, assuming we're going according to the schedule. So I will inshallah try to discuss these very quickly and take each one of them and whatever ones we might think of. I'm not claiming that these are all inclusive, but really ask ourselves, for example, how much are we sacrificing of the deen for the sake of power or status or wealth or our wives or shahawat and so forth, and look to our lives and do our best to try to remove these obstacles from the way of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. How come Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did not reveal all of the Quran at one time? Our job, our wealth, our money in this life, it doesn't mean anything to us if we have to sacrifice the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And in order to make the heart of the Prophet ﷺ very firm, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed the Quran over time and with respect to specific instances, such that the verses were revealed at the time in which it would have helped and confirmed the Prophet ﷺ the most we might possibly face in this life. Well, also Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran shows us clearly the reality of this world with respect, because there was a time period in which the Prophet ﷺ did not receive revelation. Well, what did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reveal at that time? That lead many people to stray from the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The Lord has not forsaken you whatsoever. And what will come later is much better for you than before. So, the Quran itself, in particular with respect to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and his Sahaba, and turning to the Quran was a means by which their hearts could be firm. But also for us, it's not just also for them, but also for us, if we turn to the Quran, it is one of the strongest and most important means by which we can stick to the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. By reading the Quran, it will increase our iman. And to be reminded of the signs of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to be reminded of His teachings, inshallah, our iman will increase by what we see in this world. Another way, another means by which, inshallah, we can stick to the straight path is by continually and constantly checking ourselves and looking at our deeds. I have to do my best to make tawbah, to ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to forgive me and to wipe away those sins with good deeds after it. So constantly checking oneself, constantly making sure that one is following and doing the good deeds and being aware of the sins that he has committed, such that he will do his best not to repeat them and do his best to stay away from them. And this is one of the important means of, inshallah, keeping oneself along the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because by this way also, as we tend to stray, if someone tends to stray from the path, he will see it. As opposed to the other person who is not really carefully watching his deeds, and he is slowly straying away from the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala until finally he wakes up in kufr, or he wakes up completely away from the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It is also narrated from Umar al-Khattab that every night he used to hit himself, for example, in the leg, and ask himself, what have I done today? What were the deeds that he did that day? At this where they asked him, not even you, O Messenger of Allah, and he said, not even me, unless Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala covers me in His mercy and His grace. That they say that they are satisfied with the deeds that they're doing and they don't think they have to do any more. But through those deeds that we perform, we gain the mercy and the grace of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that He will enter us trying to practice more about deen. If I do this and I do that, and that's sufficient. And remember this hadith that it is the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His grace and His blessings and His love that we are looking for, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will cover us with His mercy and will overlook our sins and so forth, and will reward us greatly for those deeds, such that He will enter us into Jannah. So we must constantly be seeking to improve ourselves, seeking to please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because when we seek to improve ourselves and seek to please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will be pleased with us, and then He will take our deeds and He will cover us in His mercy, and He will enter us into Jannah. And in fact, we have to realize that everything that the Prophet ﷺ did, or everything that the Prophet ﷺ has ordered us to do, we will not be able to do. The Prophet ﷺ told that to the Sahaba. He said, the best way to answer all of those shubahat, doubts, misconceptions that a shaitan will try to put into your mind. Going to the Quran, another means is going to the Quran and studying and following the examples of the prophets that have come before us, and the examples that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us. Because there you will find that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala put them through trials and temptations that are much greater than anything they will face in this life. And we should follow their example and guide it. In fact, we say it in Al-Fatiha, Ihdina Sirat al-Mustaqim, for the situation. Well, also, another point is sticking to the Jama'ah, and sticking to the Islamic Muslim community that is following the path. And also, the opposite of what I talked about earlier, making sure that we have pious friends, good friends, people who will remind us of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the way of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Then when we face any fitna, when we have any trial in our life, those friends inshallah will remind us of the way of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and will make us firm inshallah. Sticking to the way of Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah, not only acquiring the sound way, but sticking to the way of Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah, to make sure you don't follow any bid'ah, because bid'ah is one of the most dangerous things for our deen. Also having the full confidence, going to the Quran and seeing and having the full confidence that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give you victory whether or not in this dunya, at least Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give you victory in the hereafter. And finally, no, not finally, thinking about the pleasures of paradise, and remembering paradise, and thinking about the punishment of hell, and remembering death. The Prophet ﷺ, and in many cases, many times told us to increase our remembrance of that thing that brings an end to pleasures. In other words, death. And we should do our best to remember death. And finally is to guard one's tongue. Because the Prophet ﷺ clearly, and he showed us that the iman or the faith of a slave, of a person, will not be sound until his heart is sound. And his heart will not be sound until his tongue is sound. That's the Muslim Ahmed. Finally, not finally as a meme, no, finally as a comment. And in the Prophet ﷺ, again talking about the heart, he said that, and in the Arabic language, the qalb, the heart has been called qalb because qalb means something that can be turned easily, or it has the same root. So the Prophet ﷺ said that the heart has come from this root, something that can be turned, or because it can be turned easily. And he said the parable of the heart is like a feather or something very light that is at the root of a tree, and the wind blows it this way and that way and turns it over. So the heart is something very vulnerable, very volatile, and we have to be aware of that, and we have to be aware of all of these means that can help us, inshallah, to stick to the straight path. And then when we stick to the straight path, al-malaika will come to us, and they will, and I'll give you some verses again that you can go read, that what is the result, inshallah, waiting for us when we stick to the straight path. That's in Surah Fusilat, or Surah number 41, verses 30 and 32, and Surah Al-Ahqaf, verses 13 and 14. Well, unfortunately, because we started quite a bit late, we didn't have time to cover everything, but I hope inshallah at least we have some idea of the importance of this topic, and we understand some of the means that might make us stray from the topic, and at the same time we have some idea of what are some of the things that we can turn to that will help us stick to the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله لي ولكم.